Anxiety Part 2. So what can you do to get relief from anxiety? In Part 1, I talked about what I've found so far to be the two main causes of anxiety. Let's see what can be done about these. So the first one. If in childhood you suffered through something that made you fear for your life, and the memory of that is still keeping you on the lookout for any signs that it might happen again, which means you're anxious, then to get relief for that, there's Peter Levine's work. Maybe you don't remember exactly what happened because you were very young. Or maybe you remember the events, but you don't feel that much fear when you think about what you've been through. In my case, I did remember that my dad used to shout and also hit me. But for years, I was laughing about it. I dismissed the notion that it was something that had traumatized me. I thought, hey, I didn't die, I'm fine, and I'm even glad it happened because it taught me to be careful. It took many years to realize how much this strong fear was still very much with me, and it was out of habit that I was preventing myself from being aware of it. I talked about that in Part 1 and in more detail in my other videos. So, what does Peter Levine recommend doing that's effective? One part of his work that I'm really impressed by, because I find it very ingenious, is when he explains that if we have had situations in the past where we got overwhelmed and our instinctive fight, flight, freeze reaction took over and we couldn't escape or fight back and we ended up going with the last resort of freezing, this creates strong emotional memories. And then in new situations that have some elements that remind us of what happened, we remember how overwhelmed we were, and this memory makes us freeze again. For example, for a person who was raped, they might hear a voice that reminds them of the voice of the attacker, and they freeze. Or it can be a smell, a sight, or some word or a touch, anything that reminds you of that overwhelming past, and then unconsciously it triggers that instinctive freezing. So when we've been victimized, we tend to freeze again, which prevents us from escaping or trying to defend ourselves, and this makes us more likely to get victimized again. So Peter Levine's solution to escape this repetition is to reenact the original situation, but change the ending. And reenact not just only imagining in our mind, but also perform the actual movements, actions. For example, if we wanted to escape but we couldn't, when reenacting we're going to run, or at least run in place, move our legs. And these movements in the reenactment, where the new outcome is that we succeed in protecting ourselves, the memory of these movements also stays in our mind. And then when the original memories get triggered, the memories of the reenactment also get triggered, and they counterbalance the emotional effect of the original memories. And we no longer freeze, and we're free to choose how we want to respond. He explains that these memories are in a part of our brain that is outside our consciousness, that has to do with movement. He calls this implicit memory as opposed to explicit memory, which is what we can remember consciously. I did a reenactment like that for what happened with my dad, and it worked. And it did free me from the part of my anxiety that came from that. Again, the details are in my 6-part video on healing childhood trauma. I was having this fear triggered many times per day, even last year, over 40 years after the fact. Anytime I was doing anything I might do in a way that my dad could have gotten angry about when I was little. I wasn't aware of getting afraid. I wasn't aware I was anxious. The effect of this fear and this freezing was that my thinking brain got disconnected from what I was doing, and from what was going on around me and in my body. Levine explains this is part of an instinctive reaction to danger, when the faster, instinctive part of the brain takes over to try to save our life. all through my life, I didn't realize all this was going on because I didn't perceive any actual danger around me. It was all in my memory. This was very confusing. What I noticed was that I was distracted. I had trouble thinking clearly, and I felt an urge to stop doing whatever I was doing, which was usually some task like work or fixing something in the house. Anything I could possibly make a mistake at. So now, after this reenactment, I'm no longer afraid, and I'm really grateful to Peter Levine for this technique, and I recommend it. I'll put a link in the description to one of his books, Waking the Tiger, where he tells the story of a reenactment like this, with an Eskimo boy who got attacked by dogs. Not everything Levine says makes full sense to me, but there's a lot I'm impressed by in his work. So that was for Peter Levine's cure for anxiety that comes from memories of having been powerless in the face of danger. For anxiety that shows up as what psychiatrists have called obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, I think a major part of the cure is just in understanding where it comes from. Again, in early childhood. For example, after my children were born, I started becoming very preoccupied with keeping germs away from them. By the time they were 5 or 6, my worries had become so intense that we stopped having friends over, because it was such a hassle. I was insisting on cleaning everything in the house that might have been touched by someone who hadn't washed their hands well enough, and then it turned to also insisting that everyone change into clean clothes when they came over. When we went anywhere, I carried rubbing alcohol, and after we touched anything that had been touched by people I couldn't be sure about, we would wipe our hands. I was afraid the children would touch something with killer germs and then they'd put their hands in their mouth and they'd get some weird new illness that would kill them. Eventually, because of this and also conflicts over sending them to school, my now ex-wife had enough and left and took them away, and their teen years they spent only their weekends with me. So this so-called OCD really caused damage in our family. I'll put a link in the description to a video showing people with similar anxiety over what might happen if they don't take certain precautions. In the video, you can also see the kind of treatment that gets dished out today that's supposed to help cure this. It's called exposure therapy, which is a misnomer because even though it has a lot of exposure, there's almost zero therapy in it. Basically, it's trying to convince people that their brain is malfunctioning and they should just force themselves to stop acting crazy and hope that after some time their fear will somehow disappear. So there is a complete disregard from medical authorities for any rational causes that might explain this puzzling behavior. Again, they look at this as brain malfunction, and if forcing yourself to stop worrying doesn't work, then they'll give you medication to chemically make you stop. I find this appalling, to not even try to understand what's going on and just do away with the symptoms of the problem by giving people drugs that mess with their brain. And if that doesn't work, their next solution is to go in with a knife or with electric shocks. I'm not kidding. Their solution is to butcher you. I have another video about 2 doctors from the University of Florida who do exactly that, still today. Okay, I understand that their intentions are good, but wow, how these doctors are misinformed. This is the 21st century and medicine has come a long way. If you break a bone or you get some other kind of injury, they'll do a good job of repairing that. Microsurgery too, that's great. But from what I see, when it starts to get out of basic mechanics and into anything that involves regulation, like digestion or sleep or the immune system or the nervous system and the brain, medicine just has not progressed this far yet. My worries disappeared the day I understood where exactly they were coming from. It was because my dad used to point to street children in Tehran, where I grew up, saying they're dirty and bad and I shouldn't talk to them. Without being conscious of it, because I was a small child, I became afraid that I might become like these children and then my dad would kick me out of the house or he'd beat me. Once I understood that, this fear disappeared along with the OCD, because it became obvious that it was never about germs and this danger from my childhood was long gone. So for people with so-called OCD, I suggest you consider this possibility, that the fear you have is a remnant from childhood when there was a very real danger that you perceived. But because this danger was never openly acknowledged by anyone, it remains to this day outside your consciousness. And it's causing you to be afraid without knowing exactly why. And you are just doing a sensible thing by being extra careful, taking precautions against anything that might possibly bring harm to yourself or someone you love. So for getting relief from this type of anxiety, I suggest you explore your childhood for things that you were afraid of. And you can do this on your own or with someone who is willing to help you explore and willing to accept that you're not just crazy or just being difficult, and that there must be something logical, perfectly valid explanation for what you're experiencing. Another widespread variant of anxiety, I forgot to talk about it in part 1, is codependence. Codependence starts when parents are so overwhelmed by their own emotions that they don't give a child enough attention. Children need a lot of attention in order to grow up healthy emotionally. It's attention and emotional interaction with caring adults that lets children build their emotional skills. So, when children don't receive enough attention, and they discover that it's possible to get at least a little attention by helping out their parents who are so overwhelmed, then the children do that. These are often the children of alcoholics or addicts in general, or people who suffer from other manifestations such as depression or anxiety, of not having received enough support themselves in childhood to develop into emotionally functional adults. So children in these families, instead of enjoying their childhood, playing and doing fun things that make them happy and reinforce the sense that life is wonderful, they spend their time doing chores or caring for younger siblings or becoming the parents' confidant and giving the parents emotional support, all for the crumbs of attention that they receive from their parents when they help out like this. Meanwhile, these children are not getting their own emotional needs met, and also they come to think of themselves as not worth people's attention. They get their sense of worth by caring for others, which means they become dependent on having someone who needs their help in order to cope. And they're anxious because if this person ever leaves them, then they also lose what gives them their sense of worth. So these people typically pick romantic partners, they think they're rescuing from something, and it becomes this unhealthy dance where the codependent puts up with all sorts of abuse while helping their partner stay functional, enough to fit in society. But not more than that, or they can no longer get their sense of worth from helping this partner, which helps keep the partner dependent on whatever substance or behavior they're using to contain their emotions. So you can see why both people stay very anxious. Pia Mellody explains all this in detail, and she says that codependence is so common that it's become invisible. People think it's natural to not love oneself. It's a major problem in society, and most people who are suffering from this are not aware of it. Okay, so how do we get relief from this cause of anxiety that's behind codependence? And as I said in part 1, that is also the second major cause of anxiety. And that's not having learned to contain our emotions and not loving ourselves. Because again, this keeps us emotionally dependent, and then we're afraid that the people we depend on for soothing us might leave us. What can you do if you haven't learned to contain your emotions and if you don't love yourself? How can you become stronger emotionally so you no longer get overwhelmed by emotions and you no longer run to a substance or a behavior that is ruining your life? Or you no longer depend on people who you're afraid might leave you? These substances and behaviors, these external remedies, they keep you dependent, and you know this, and it's hard not to think that you're flawed, you're worthless. And of course, if deep down that's your opinion of yourself, you're going to be unhappy, depressed, anxious. So, how do you switch to loving yourself? First off, I hope this makes it clear that medication is not the answer, because all it does is numb your emotions. It hides the problem instead of fixing it. It doesn't change your opinion of yourself. It doesn't make you satisfied and excited about being yourself. Antidepressants, citalopram, paroxetine, fluoxetine, trazodone, or trade names like Paxil, Prozac, Celexa, Effexor, Zoloft, and other mood stabilizers like lithium or Seroquel or Zyprexa, at best they provide temporary relief. And what I hear people saying is that after a few weeks, you end up going back to the doctor because the anxiety or the depression is back. And the doctor then increases the dose or switches you to some other medication, which doesn't fare better. The top results for a web search on the long-term effectiveness of antidepressants, even studies by the National Institute of Mental Health, say that it's not clear antidepressants are effective. And then there's all the side effects, all the horror stories. I had lost contact with my first girlfriend after she broke up with me when we were 21. And last year, I was shocked to hear that she had died after 25 years of having been on antidepressants. Her health had degraded so much that her body gave up one night after taking a cold medicine. And she was a very lively, beautiful, smart woman. Just the fact that she held on 25 years like that shows how strong she was. Even though her family is well off, they couldn't find anyone to help her. I'm sure doctors were trying to help, but they had no clue. So for 25 years, they just kept giving her antidepressants, and they watched her health deteriorate. Unfortunately, this is typical. Millions of people not only don't get lasting relief from medication, but their health gets worse, and meanwhile, their emotional wounds remain untreated. Because medication suppresses the strong emotions that point to the emotional issues that need to be resolved. It makes it more difficult to get to these issues and help people resolve them. Maybe in some emergencies, medication for emotional useful issues can be useful. I don't know, and I doubt it. But certainly outside of emergencies, it's clear to me that it's harmful. Medication is not a cure, and I don't trust the judgment of doctors who defend medication without understanding what the issues actually are. So, medication, no. So, what does help? Well, if you haven't learned to soothe yourself, to contain your emotions so you don't get overwhelmed, learning to do that is what's going to help. I'll put a link in the description to a talk by Allan Schore, who explains how babies, when they're with their mother, they instinctively learn to contain and regulate their feelings from the way their mother stays calm and attentive and caring. This happens automatically. It's unconscious learning. But if your mother never learned that herself, then it makes sense you could not learn this from her. Because nobody modeled it for her, so she couldn't model it for you. And in this case, what you need is to interact with someone who has this skill. Interact long enough so that by the same unconscious process you would have used when you were a baby, you learn this skill of containing your emotions. Now, one difficulty here is finding someone who has this skill. It's not easy. It seems to me there aren't many people around who can do this. People who don't get overwhelmed by their own emotional reactions to what you say and do, who are able to remain calm even when you are there experiencing strong feelings. And not just that, because you don't want someone who just sits there without responding to you. You want someone who is also attentive to you, interested in what you're experiencing, someone who sees you as a fellow human being who is just as worthy of respect as themselves, someone who sees you just as worthy of consideration and attention and care as they are. And you want this person to sense what you're going through, how you are experiencing the situation you see yourself in your life right now. You want this person, by their presence, to make it clear to you that it's understandable you feel the way you do, given what's going on for you. That it's okay to have the thoughts and the feelings you're having, and that someone else in the same situation could very well experience it the same way you do. Again, same idea as with mother and baby. If the baby is happy and excited, the mother is going to mirror being happy. She's going to smile and make a happy face and make happy sounds. Yes, you're happy! And this feedback gives the baby the sense of being understood, seen, heard, a sense that the world is a safe place where people care about you and you're free to have fun and be happy and enjoy yourself. Same thing if the baby is feeling some pain or discomfort. The mother picks up on that and shows with her face and with her voice and the movements she makes that she understands what's going on. She's concerned and she takes action to relieve the pain. It hurts? Oh, it's your tooth that's coming out. Yeah, it hurts, huh? And she gently holds and presses the baby against her, which is soothing. So with an adult, it's the same idea. It's the same kind of feedback that is soothing. Someone showing they see what you're going through and they know what it feels like. Going back to the baby, obviously if the mother freaks out instead, when the baby starts to cry because of the pain of that tooth, it's not going to reassure the baby. It's not going to help the baby become used to thinking of pain as something that's no big deal because it's soon going to be over. Instead, if the mother reacts with fear or panic or frustration or doesn't react at all and ignores the baby, if maybe she has fear left over from her own childhood and she thinks that the baby is exaggerating or is being weak or difficult, then on top of the pain and maybe fear, the baby is going to be more afraid and overwhelmed and is not going to make progress towards becoming able to contain emotions. So you want somebody who's going to both really understand what you're going through and also stay calm no matter what you say and attentive to you. So you get the experience that it's okay to feel your way you do. And then you're reassured, and with enough repetition of this, you'll come to expect that your feelings can stay under control. There's no need to be afraid because you won't get overwhelmed. And that's how you learn to contain your emotions. I went through this myself last year at 50. It took 2 weeks of talking almost every day for a couple hours to start to get relief from overwhelming anxiety. And then after 4 months, I could soothe myself on my own well enough that I didn't need someone else for this. So it's possible at any age, I think. If you have a friend or a family member who can do this for you, then great. But I guess not, otherwise you would already have learned this. The next solution people recommend is going to a therapist. But in my experience, and from what I've heard from others, and from what I see online, it's difficult to find one who's able to help. Why? First, because what they teach in medical school about anxiety and depression and addiction is the disease model. The models I've been talking about, from Pia Mellody and Alice Miller before her in part, and Peter Levine, and the research of people like Allan Schore and Stephen Porges, I guess we have to wait another few decades before these more effective models get included in what doctors and therapists get taught. That's bureaucracy for you. And then there's the fact that most of the people who conceive of learning as something that's given to them by authorities don't think of looking outside their textbooks and professional journals for new ideas. They've been spoon-fed knowledge all their life. Most of them haven't learned to think for themselves. I mean, look at the facts. What I've been describing here sounds pretty straightforward, right? And yet, this is not what you see on the main health websites. Just the fact that antidepressants have been in the top prescribed medication for 30 years shows that anxiety and depression are major societal problems. And this fact means that the solutions that you see everywhere don't work. I have a video about one of the top psychiatrists in France, who's always on TV and on the radio, and he has many books about self-esteem, meditation, mindfulness. And I find it tragic. In an interview, this man admits to getting overwhelmed by his feelings. He says he can get so overwhelmed sometimes that he runs off to a monastery, because that's where he finds relief, in being cut off from the rest of the world. He says it's such a problem that his wife is scared he's going to leave her and disappear in that monastery. So this man gets overwhelmed by his emotions, and he's one of the top psychiatrists. And no one sees the problem with that, neither his colleagues, nor the media, nobody. Because apparently they haven't heard of the work of Pia Mellody, Peter Levine, Allan Schore, and the other people who have built a more correct, I think, understanding of what causes emotional problems. And it's the same elsewhere. I already talked about those two doctors from the University of Florida, and I listen to the Shrink Wrap podcast. There's 500 or 600 interviews of therapists in the US and Canada, and again, it's the same problem. So if you can find a therapist who has the emotional skills needed to be able to help you learn these skills, you can hire them to help you. But if you don't find one, what are your other options? Well, the next option you hear about is 12-step groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. Unfortunately, from what I've seen, this is unlikely to be helpful enough, because the focus of these groups is on getting you off the thing you're addicted to, and as soon as your addiction is no longer active, they're satisfied. They stop there. Their focus is not on healing the emotional wounds that cause you to be addicted in the first place, nor on helping you learn the emotional skills you're missing. Because again, apparently they haven't heard that this is what's behind addiction or depression or anxiety, etc. Pia Mellody has this chart where she shows how anxiety, depression, addiction, codependence, and a few other visible symptoms like this are only surface issues. She explains how the deeper issue is when one or more of 5 key emotional skills are missing. Her work builds on the work of Alice Miller, who, as far as I know, was the first to write about how children can be severely harmed by abuse and neglect that is pretty much invisible because it's emotional and not physical. The link to this chart and to presentations of Pia Mellody's work are in the description. So with 12-step groups, you can probably get some relief, and I'm glad these groups exist because they do help. But the problem I see with these groups is that they don't help enough, and the people there remain unhappy and suffering because they haven't addressed the root emotional causes that are keeping them suffering. And I also don't like how they ask you to admit that you're powerless to help yourself, because I think that's counterproductive if the goal is to recover your sense of self-worth. But maybe some 12-step groups don't have these shortcomings, and if you're satisfied with what a group near you brings, then you have this option. When I was looking for relief last year, none of these options were enough to help me. I still can't believe how lucky I was that a friend introduced me to another friend who turned out to be able to remain calm enough to listen to me without getting too distracted by her own emotions, and who also happened to have the time and the interest to talk with me. I know lots of people who can do some of this, even a lot of it, but this is the only person so far who didn't freak out at some point, and then I would be afraid to continue revealing myself because it wasn't bringing me relief, and maybe even it was making things worse. No. So yes, I was very lucky, because there seems to be so few people around at peace enough with themselves to be able to consistently remain calm and attentive. So for you, if you've looked at all these options and you still haven't found someone able to help you enough, then there is one more option. You can ask me. I'm offering my help and I do it for free. I've been doing this for a few years for friends. And in the past, I couldn't do that effectively enough a lot of the time because I was freaking out talking about certain topics. I was getting overwhelmed by my own emotional reactions. But not anymore. So now I'm able to do this. And I find it very satisfying to be able to give people effective support that they appreciate. I'm doing this for free for multiple reasons. First, when I needed someone myself to get this support from, coming up with the money was a major obstacle. So I'm offering my help for free in order for money to not be an obstacle. Because what I want is to live in a world where every person who needs this kind of help can get it. Because I think this problem of getting overwhelmed by our emotions and not loving ourselves and suffering from childhood trauma is the main problem facing humanity today. I hope once enough people are no longer so anxious that most of their attention is fixated on looking for danger so they can stay safe, their attention will be free for resolving problems, and then we'll have a much better chance of resolving the other big problems humanity is facing today: violence and wars, poverty, pollution. So I want to do my part and help as many people as I can to learn the emotional skills they're missing. And I hope that some of these people will in turn help others, etc., and eventually will succeed at eliminating violence before it eliminates us, possibly. Another reason why I'm doing this for free is I had this terrible fear of my dad hitting me or throwing me out of the house if I did anything he got angry about. And with my income so low that paying for therapy would have been most of what I earned, I was terrified, without realizing exactly why, that it would be unspeakably bad if I paid that much for therapy that turned out to not be effective enough. So, for people who have a similar fear from having been physically abused, and there are many of them since this is what's called perfectionism, I think, this removes an important obstacle to getting help. So, I'm offering my support for free, but if after a few weeks you find that, oh wow, it's really helping, you've been getting a lot of relief and you're satisfied and you're grateful and you can afford to make a donation, then I'm happy to accept it, because it helps me do more of this work that I think is more useful than anything else I could be doing. My contact information is on this channel. Okay, we talked about containing our emotions, but let's also talk about accepting and loving ourselves, the second key emotional skill, I think. To heal anxiety, we need to reclaim this skill. I say reclaim because I'm convinced as babies we all have this sense of being a person worthy of attention and affection. If we're treated with basic respect until our conscious image of ourselves has developed enough, sometime around 7 if all goes well, then our instinctive sense of self-worth becomes permanent. It's when there is no one to help us hang on to it that we lose it, I think. Or when we get repeatedly attacked for expressing our wants and needs. We're so much smaller than our parents, these giants who have so much power over us, that if we see that it's not safe to stand up for ourselves, our instinctive reaction is to give in and submit. And we stop seeing ourselves as a person worthy of attention and love. I talk at length about this skill and how to reclaim it in my 6-part video on healing childhood trauma, so you can find this information there. So that's how to get relief from anxiety, by going to the roots of the issue and doing the work that's needed there, such as developing missing emotional skills. Like I said, for me it took 2 weeks to get out of emergency, then 4 months until I could do this work alone. And after another 4 months, I switched over to being happy and calm most of the time, rather than being anxious most of the time. And seen from outside, my life hasn't changed. The external problems I've been facing are still in front of me, like I'm still not earning enough to live the way I want. But what's changed is how I see myself and other people, my worldview. This is a profound change. Before, I was too overwhelmed to be able to find solutions to the problems I saw facing me. But now I'm calm and I can find solutions, and I enjoy my life, and I can see how to make it even more enjoyable. So I'm really happy about that. We talked about getting long-term relief by going to the roots of the issues, but now to finish, let's look at what you can do in the short term, regardless of any support you are getting, on your own right now to get relief. The first thing I find helps is to realize that even if you think you are not achieving enough in your life, the fact that you are a living human being, already this gives you immense value. Already this makes you good enough. There is nobody else who is exactly the same as you. You are a unique person, a unique example of what a human being can be. Your existence, exactly as you are right now, adds variety to life, and that's valuable in itself. Just by being alive, you're part of the universe, and nobody knows for sure how important you are, how important to the universe you will turn out to be, just by being how you are, doing nothing else than being you. You may think you're failing miserably at everything, but see, just by being alive, you're enriching the universe. You are taking part in this mysterious and great adventure of life, which would not be the same without you. I find that seeing myself this way brings a lot of relief. It removes a lot of the pressure I had when I thought I have to achieve this or that, or I'm just a useless burden to everyone, and the world would be better off without me. Seeing that just by being alive, even if I do nothing else, I'm already contributing in a way that no one else can, because no one else is exactly like me, that changes how I see myself and what I'm doing here alive in this world. I hope it will bring you relief too, to see yourself in this way, that you're unique and you're contributing in a unique way just by being here, being alive, without having to do anything more. Oh, also I'll put a link in the description to the short story The Egg, which I like a lot because it presents another aspect of this idea that I hope will also inspire you. Okay, the second thing that you can do on your own anytime you're anxious to get at least a little relief is, on a scale of 1 to 10, try to sense how intense your anxiety is. This helps because when your intellectual brain hooks into what is going on in the emotional part of the brain, this already calms things down a little, and you get some relief. The third thing is breathing in a way that helps to relax. There are many different types of breathing exercises. Traditions that say you have to breathe in from this nostril and hold that number of seconds and then breathe out this other complicated way. I'll put a link in the description to the work of Stephen Porges, who explains that neurophysiologically you get a relaxing effect whenever you breathe out more slowly than you breathe in. That's it, it's that simple. In the past, they didn't have the science to figure this out, but now the explanation is here. So you can just do this. Breathe out more slowly than you breathe in for a minute. And you'll get a little relief. Not much maybe, but still it is relief. The fourth thing that helps is to put your attention on the sensations in your body. Peter Levine explains this at length in Waking the Tiger, so that's another reason for me to recommend that book. You don't need to do anything else than notice the sensations you are feeling. Whether you feel that some muscles are tight or you feel warm somewhere or cold, etc. Levine explains how by practicing this, you gradually decouple your perception of what's going on in your body from your emotional reaction to it, and how it's the emotional reaction and not the actual body sensations that are overwhelming. I think this is a very important insight for healing trauma. And possibly it's where a lot of the benefits of meditation come from. And I like that it's also simpler to do. You just get directly to the part that helps the most. The last thing in my top 5 is to move your body. Get some exercise. If you go for a walk, that's already good. But if you run or swim or bicycle or do a few push-ups or squats, anything to get your body moving long enough that you get warmed up, it helps. Because we're not just ghosts. We are our body, and when we maintain our body in good working order, our mind is also healthier. So, a little exercise makes the blood circulate a bit faster, and it maintains the blood vessels. Breathing in and out a bit faster improves the tone of the muscles used for respiration. If you do this outside, then also just looking at nature is relaxing. The sky, the clouds, the stars. And it also relaxes your eyes to be looking at things farther away than a wall or the ceiling. And it relaxes your mind to think of something other than problems. And with physical effort, you also naturally feel good afterwards. Our bodies, just like other animals, we're in better health when we move. Our bodies have evolved in order for us to use them, more than when we just sit all day. 15-20 minutes of exercise that's not brutal so it doesn't damage you, makes you healthier in both body and mind. And then you also sleep better. So really, find ways to get the exercise you need. And you can build up to it. It's okay to start slow and progress slowly. It's still good for you. That's it. If you like what you heard here and you want to help other people find it, please click the thumbs up button. And also tell people who know, who might be interested by this information. If you ask questions in the comments, I'll respond as fast as I can. And you can contact me if you want support for getting relief from anxiety or depression or anything else. Thanks for watching. All the best to you. Take care.